Part 34. The Original Vampire. Author, Ludo Busrud. Chapter 334. Back in the room, Colin took a shower and prepared to rest. However, I couldn't fall asleep while I was lying on the bed, tossing and turning. My mind kept thinking about the secrets that Count Schultz had just revealed to me. Suddenly, Colin realized a problem. When Queen Midla claimed to be Vera's mother, she also revealed another secret: she poisoned Marquis Adams. If Queen Midla was not Vera's biological mother, why did she poison Adams when Duke St. Hilda broke his promise and did not give Vera the title of Marquis of the North? Well, if this is also a lie told by Queen Midra, what about the will left by Duke St. Hilda? Before his death, Count Amon said that someone forced Duke St. Hilda to make this will, and this person was most likely Queen Midla. Moreover, when she was in Yulong City, Queen Midla had indeed been helping Vera successfully inherit the position of Duke of the North. If it wasn't because Vera was her daughter, then why? What Queen Midra said might be false, but what she did was always true. Based on these, Colin could not deny her special care for Vera. As for Count Schultz, on the contrary, Count Schultz seems to have only verbal claims but no proof of actions. However, Colin also felt that Count Schultz was unlikely to lie. After all, if she were not Vera's biological mother, first of all, as an outsider, it would be impossible for her to know who Vera's biological father was. Moreover, her lies would be exposed by Marquis Garcia immediately. After all, she was already preparing to openly communicate with Vera. The mother-daughter relationship. Wait. Colin immediately sat up straight in bed. Count Schultz wants to make his mother-daughter relationship with Vera public. Colin suddenly realized that once Count Schultz recognized Vera in public and confirmed their mother-daughter relationship, even if she was lying, Marquis Garcia would not dare to refute it publicly. Because the relationship between Queen Midla and Vera is not visible to the public. The glorious empire will never accept a queen who is incestuous with her brother. The reputation of the St. Hilda family will also suffer a huge blow. Therefore, Count Schultz would be confident if he lied. However, there is only one problem with this hypothesis: how did Count Schultz know that Marquis Garcia was Vera's biological father? Moreover, judging from her fearless look, she should also know that Vera's real biological mother is Queen Midla. Not even Marquis Garcia told Colin the secret. Who lied? Queen Midla? Or Count Schultz? This question lingered in Colin's mind, and he could no longer sleep peacefully. Since he couldn't sleep, Colin simply climbed out of bed. Putting on a coat, Colin walked out of the room. It was dark at night, and Swan Castle was quiet. Only the faint hoot of an owl could be heard coming from nowhere. Colin walked along the dim corridor, thinking about whether he should take Vera into the city tomorrow. If Count Schultz is lying, then once Vera enters the city and the two recognize each other in public, even if Count Schultz is not Vera's biological mother, he must be her. Because Marquis Garcia did not dare to refute it publicly, and as for Queen Midla, she even dared not admit it. Thinking of this, Colin suddenly felt that he could not take Vera into the city. At least ask Marquis Garcia first. If Count Schultz is really Vera's biological mother, Colin can take her to Winter City to meet Vera. There is no need to rush. After making the decision, Colin felt much more relaxed. Just when he was about to return to his room to rest, he smelled the vague smell of blood again. Colin's eyes shrank. Because he discovered that the smell of blood was exactly the same as what he smelled in the confessional of the Glory Church in Swan City not long ago. Following this smell, Colin quickened his pace. Not long after, he found that he was back on the open-air balcony, where he had just talked with Count Schultz. The cold moonlight shone on Colin's face, reflecting his uncertain expression. Colin looked at the dark lake outside the balcony, which looked like the giant mouth of an abyss, with a sneer on his lips. Count Schultz, it seems that you are really not a kind person. On the early morning of the second day, just after dawn, several maids who were fetching water by the lake saw Colin and his entourage returning to the camp on horseback. "Good morning, Lord Viscount." "Good morning, has the Duke woke up yet?" "Not yet." Colin nodded to the maids, then entered the camp and went straight to Vera's tent. The new Duke of the North was indeed still sleeping soundly. Colin leaned down and kissed her gently on her fair and smooth forehead. Vera's long eyelashes trembled slightly, and then she opened her eyes in a daze. Seeing it was Colin, she hummed softly, hugged his arm as a pillow, and said softly, "Kellen, why are you like this? Have you come back a long time ago?" Colin stretched out his hand to comb Vera's silky hair, and said warmly, "I'm here to say goodbye to you, and I'll go back to Swan City later." Vera sat up straight and put her arms around Colin's neck, asking, "Bishop John hasn't been found yet, has he?" "Not yet, and I also found some interesting things here that require further investigation, so you should go back to Winter City first." Okay. Vera was a little reluctant, stepped forward, and gave Colin a deep kiss. After some tenderness, Colin took out a letter from his arms and handed it to Vera, and at the same time warned, "After returning to Winter City, help me hand this letter to Marquis Garcia, and ask him to immediately write me a reply, do you understand?" Seeing Colin's serious expression, Vera put away her original laziness and nodded seriously, "I understand." "Okay, I'll go then. Remember to help me follow the two. Say goodbye to this little guy. Well, be careful." Outside Swan City, the Schultz family's honor guard once again formed the neatest formation, showing the highest spirit and energy, preparing to welcome the upcoming event. Distinguished guest. Count Schultz and Lucien stood at the front of the team, hand in hand, with perfect smiles on their faces, watching the team approach from the other side of the river. But not long after, the smile on Lucien's face froze. He narrowed his eyes and said in a serious voice, "No, that's not the Duke of the North's car, there are too few people." "What?" Shu Erlertz also quickly looked at it carefully, and then he also discovered something was wrong. Her heart sank, and she kept thinking about which step had gone wrong. Soon, Colin arrived at the foot of Swan City. He immediately got off his horse and said with a sincere face, "I'm so sorry, Count Schultz, the Duke's motorcade has already set off. I was a step late and didn't catch up." Count Schultz took a deep breath and suppressed his heart. With roiling anger and vague fear, he tried to look slightly disappointed, but not too much, and said, "It doesn't matter, it seems that Swan City is destined not to enjoy this glory." Colin watched Shure carefully. The expression on Count Schultz's face suddenly laughed and he said, "Count Schultz, you'd better go to Winter City to meet the Duke in person." As it should be, Count Schultz regained his composure again, that elegant and noble man. The Countess appears again. Colin turned to look at Lucien, who was expressionless, and said with a smile, "Your Excellency Lucien, how about we search Swan City together again to see if we can find out the whereabouts of Bishop John?" Lucien said calmly. He smiled and said, "What an honor." The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 335. Amidst heavy footsteps, Lucien, wearing silver-white armor, walked into Swan Castle. A guard took the helmet and sword that Lucien took off, and another pretty maid bowed to Lucien and presented a clean wet towel. Lucien wiped his face with a towel and asked, "Where's Madame?" The maid took the wet towel and whispered back, "The Earl is changing clothes on the second floor." Lucien nodded and went up the spiral staircase. On the second floor, when he opened a wooden door, he saw that Count Schultz had changed into a pure black dress. Her hair was tied into the most popular style of a lady's bun, and a string of crystal and round pearl necklaces hung around her creamy neck. Her delicate three-dimensional facial features were painted with a light face, making her appear graceful, luxurious, and incomparably beautiful. "You're back." Count Schultz smiled brightly at his husband, took a few steps forward to help him take off his armor, and asked, "What did you gain today?" Lucien chuckled, shrugged, and said, "If I could get anything out of it, I accompanied the Viscount Angelet for a walk around the Neuschwanstein castle. However, I found that the Viscount did not seem to be perfunctory, but was seriously searching for the whereabouts of Bishop John." Schultz the Earl smiled lightly and said disapprovingly, "What can he find when he looks for a needle in a haystack like this?" Lucien frowned and considered, "I think he may have made some discoveries, otherwise he wouldn't be able to be so focused all the time as if he was really looking for clues." Count Schultz's hand paused, and his face became a little solemn. "Did he find something?" Lucien shook his head and said, "I don't know. However, since you must be a little suspicious if you don't want Vera to come to Swan City to meet you." Count Schultz frowned softly and said doubtfully, "I can't figure out what went wrong to make him suspicious." Lucien was undressing his armor while talking about his speculation. "Is it possible that he already knows the identity of Vera's real biological mother?" "Probably not." Count Schultz shook his head. "Since that person, I am sure that Marquis Garcia will not stand up to refute me, which means that the identity of Vera's real biological mother is extremely sensitive, and it is unlikely that Viscount Angelet will know this secret." Lucien couldn't help but ask curiously, "That person didn't reveal any information about Vera's real biological mother?" "No, he only said that Vera's real biological mother did not dare to recognize Vera." Lucien rubbed his chin, seeming to be thinking about who Vera's real biological mother was. Who could it be? Upon seeing this, Earl Schultz reminded me, "Okay, don't guess. If you are worried that Viscount Angelet has discovered something, you can test him later during the dinner." Lucien then recovered his thoughts, nodded, and said, "Okay, I'll go wash up and change into clean clothes first." Dong dong dong. At this moment, there was a sudden knock on the door. "Come in," Count Schultz said loudly, and then he saw the butler pushing the door open and entering. He first saluted and greeted the Count and his wife, and then reported, "Your Majesty, Viscount Angelet wants to visit the Swan Castle." "Visit? I think he wants to search for it." Lucien looked cold and said in a bad tone. "Said?" Earl Schultz's eyes also froze but soon returned to normal. She ordered the housekeeper, "Go and ask Viscount Angelet to wait a moment. I will accompany him to visit Swan Castle." "Yes," the housekeeper responded. He said and closed the door again. Lucien's eyes flashed with danger, and he said coldly, "Did he really find something?" Earl Schultz patted his husband's strong chest and comforted him, "If he really found something, you should pretend to know nothing, and then quietly leave Swan Castle and go to Winter City to bring in reinforcements. Instead of alarming us like now." Lucien nodded, feeling that what his wife said made sense, and his aura calmed down. "Stand up. Then what are you going to do?" "Since he wants to see it, I'll go see it with him," Count Schultz said indifferently. Lucien understood what his wife meant and nodded, "Okay, you go hang out with him, and I'll let that guy move first." "Yes." Earl Schultz nodded, and then used a warning tone. He said, "In front of that person, you'd better be more respectful." "Do you really think he is the Duke of St. Hilda?" Lucien smiled disdainfully and said, "Except for his appearance, he has nothing. His demeanor, tone, and some habits are completely different from the real Duke of St. Hilda. Although I don't know what his appearance is, he definitely can't deceive people who are really familiar with Duke St. Hilda." "Shoo!" Earl Ert said with deep meaning, "He has the face of a duke and the strength of a duke. Why can't he be the Duke of St. Hilda?" "Strength?" The expression on Lucien's face became even more disdainful. "Just based on his current state, I can chop off his head in an hourglass." "Lucien, never underestimate the power of the paladin." Count Schultz's face straightened. "Even if he is not seriously injured now, hey, if you really dare to provoke, you will never end well." Seeing that Lucien still seemed unconvinced, Count Schultz looked sharply and said, "You promised me, Lucien, don't break your promise." "Of course I remember my promise," I just hope you don't forget yours too, Lucien responded coldly. Count Schultz looked seriously into his husband's eyes and nodded. Of course I will not forget it. That's good. However, I still want to remind you, don't be fooled by the other party's name of Duchess, it is just a blank check. Count Schultz nodded solemnly and said, of course I know what I'm doing, and I won't completely trust that Duke St. Hilda who doesn't know the truth. That's good. Lucien put the half-taken off armor back on and said, let's deal with Viscount Angelet first, I will make arrangements for Duke St. Hilda. Count Schultz nodded, turned around, and walked out. Swan Castle is a Gothic-style building that uses a large number of spire designs. It is tall and thin, yet heavy. The exterior walls are painted white, which complements the green Swan Lake and has a strong visual impact. Unforgettable at first sight. This castle is more than 30 meters high, with 7 floors and more than 200 rooms. It would take more than half a day to visit them one by one. Under the leadership of Count Schultz, Colin only watched it briefly. Viscount Angelet, this is all of the main castle. There are 2 auxiliary castles behind it, as well as warehouses, stables, farms, etc. Do you want to continue visiting? Colin stood in the main entrance hall of the Swan Castle, looking around. He seemed to be admiring the surrounding decorations and furnishings. Seeing Count Schultz point his hand in the direction of the door, he did not step forward immediately. Instead, he stamped his feet on the spot and asked with a smile. Your Majesty, is there no basement under the main castle? Of course there is. At this time, Lucien walked in. He must have just finished bathing. He changed into a black dress and smiled at Colin. The wine cellar and storage room are below. Do you want to see them, Lord Viscount? Colin nodded. Said. Of course. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 336. Along the mottled stone steps, Colin followed Count Schultz towards the basement of Swansea Castle. The 2 attendants led the way and lit the brazier embedded in the stone wall in advance. The firelight illuminated the dim and gloomy corridor. Due to the inconvenient ventilation, the air in the basement was turbid. The aroma of wine, grass, and wood, and a faint smell of putrefaction were mixed together, which made people feel stuffy. Soon, several people walked down the corridor and came to a spacious underground space. Count Schultz pointed to the wooden doors in front of him and asked, Viscount Angelet, there are 7 rooms here. Which one do you want to see first? Colin glanced around the wooden doors and pointed seemingly casually. Pointing to the door in the middle, he said, is this a wine cellar? Yes. Count Schultz smiled gently, and it contains the most precious wines from Swansea Castle. Then I want to see it more. Count Schultz nodded to the attendant calmly and motioned for him to open the door. With a slightly harsh creaking sound, the wooden door slowly opened, and a tangy aroma of wine escaped. Colin's eyes lit up, and he seemed to be attracted by the smell of wine, and he immediately strode in. Count Schultz also walked in, pointed to the rows of wine racks in the room, and introduced. Viscount Angelet, these are fine wines produced in the Winster Highlands. The higher it is, if you like it, you can choose one to drink at the dinner party. I don't know much about wine, why don't you help me choose one? Colin walked in and looked at it casually. As if really attracted by the wine in this room. But in fact, he had already smelled the familiar, faint smell of blood. The disappearance of Bishop John is indeed inseparable from the Schultz family. Moreover, the Schultz family may be related to the Morrison family. I just don't know why they kidnapped Bishop John. Viscount Angelet, if I were you, I would choose the wine in that row. Count Schultz pointed to a wine rack in the center of the room and said with a smile. Colin asked curiously, why? First of all, wine is not suitable for drinking immediately when it is first produced. It is best to store it for 4 to 5 years to eliminate its sourness. The wines in this row are just right. It was created by Winster Manor 4 years ago, and that year the climate was hot and the rainfall was abundant, which made the quality of the grapes very good. I believe you will be able to taste the most wonderful flavor after hearing this. Count Schultz. After explaining, Colin nodded as if he understood, and strode forward, ready to pick one and leave. Anyway, the purpose of his trip has been achieved, confirming that the Schultz family is indeed as evil as he suspected. But just as he picked up a bottle of wine and was about to leave, the corner of his eye glanced at the other side of the wine rack, and his whole person seemed to freeze for an instant. Viscount Angelet, have you made your choice? Count Schultz looked at the motionless Colin and asked doubtfully. But Colin still stared blankly into the depths of the wine rack, as if he hadn't heard Count Schultz's question. Count Schultz looked at Lucien next to him, his eyes full of doubts, but he still strode forward. Then, the couple also froze. Because, a corpse was suddenly lying behind the row of wine racks. The blood seems to have been drained from the corpse, and it is pale and haggard, but it can still be vaguely identified that it is Bishop John, who has been missing for many days. Count Schultz's eyes widened, and he immediately looked at Lucien, as if asking him, "How do you do things?" Lucien frowned, his eyes full of doubts and grievances. He wanted to tell his wife that he had clearly warned the guy to move to a safe place first. But how did he know that that guy had left out the most important thing? No. Not an omission. He did it on purpose. Count Schultz felt a chill covering her whole body. She already understood the sinister intentions of Duke St. Hilda. The other party must have realized that his original plan might have been discovered when he saw that Vera had not entered the city, so he immediately changed his plan and sold Count Schultz to him without hesitation. Colin has discovered the body, what now? Count Schultz felt like his mind was in a state of confusion. Countless thoughts were springing up, but none of them were reliable. Colin was also stunned at this moment. He never expected that Bishop John's body would be found in the basement of Swansea Castle. When he took the initiative to visit Swan Castle before, he had no intention of actually finding Bishop John. Instead, he wanted to confirm whether the Schultz family had anything to do with Bishop John's disappearance. The way to confirm it is through the special smell of blood. But he never expected that this situation would occur. He had already given the Schultz family so much time to clean up the scene. Who knew that the other party would be so stupid as to throw Bishop John's body into the basement? It stands to reason that the case of Bishop John's disappearance has been solved. Colin should be happy. But at this moment, he couldn't be happy at all. Substantial pressure surrounded Colin from behind, completely locking him in place. He knew that Lucien had murderous intentions. With his heart racing, Colin slowly turned around, showed a stiff smile, and said, "Your Majesty, I didn't expect the murderer of Bishop John to be so cunning and with sinister intentions." Earl Schultz's face was expressionless. He looked at Colin and asked, "Oh, why do you say that?" "Because he actually dumped the bishop's body in the basement of Swansea Castle." This was clearly because he wanted to blame the Schultz family. "You said, is there a sinister intention?" Count Schultz was stunned for a moment and immediately understood what Colin meant. At this time, Count Schultz was also very confused and didn't know how to deal with Colin. Bishop John's body unexpectedly appeared in the basement of Neuschwanstein Castle, which made it difficult for the Schultz family to explain to the church. She did think about simply killing the witness Colin to suppress the matter. But he was worried that doing so would completely anger the St. Hilda family. Now the solution proposed by Colin seemed feasible, but she still couldn't make up her mind. She didn't know if such an excuse could be used to get past the church, and whether that damn Duke St. Hilda might have any tricks up his sleeve. Colin looked at Count Schultz, who was silent and his expression was constantly changing, and carefully reminded him, "Your Majesty, don't make the wrong decision, let alone fall for the real murderer." Count Schultz nibbled on his red face. Lips said in a deep voice, "Viscount Angelet, Bishop John's death really has nothing to do with the Schultz family." "I believe you," Colin immediately responded. "If you knew that Bishop John died here, how could he take the initiative to bring me down to choose wine?" Earl Schultz nodded and let out a long breath. Then, she turned to look at Lucien, as if asking for his opinion. Lucien did not relax, however. The terrifying power emanating from his body was like a big net, covering Colin, as if anything went wrong, a thunderous blow would land on his head. When Colin saw this, his heart sank. He was about to explain again when he heard the voice of the attendant coming from outside the wine cellar. "Sir, the City Defense Army sent a message saying that the Archbishop of the North, Ms. Ajani, has just arrived in Swan City." Ajani. The atmosphere in the wine cellar changed again. The Original Vampire. Author, Ludo Busroot. Chapter 337. The atmosphere in the dark basement was solemn. Count Schultz had already left in a hurry, presumably to greet the arrival of Archbishop Ajani. So only Colin and Lucien were left standing opposite each other. "Your Excellency Lucien, are you planning to kill me?" Colin suddenly spoke and asked with a smile. Lucien did not answer, but stared at Colin with sharp eyes. Facing the terrifying pressure of a sixth-level warrior as deep as the ocean, Colin was like a small boat in the stormy waves, which seemed likely to capsize at any time. "You don't dare to kill me," Colin said with a smile on his face. "I am not a little person, Viscount of the Empire, Guardian of the North, husband of Duke St. Hilda, haha, you Schultz family, can you bear the consequences of killing me?" Lucien still said nothing, but Colin caught a trace of doubt in his eyes. Colin had confidence in his heart, so he persuaded him again. "I believe that the Schultz family is responsible for my troubles. Why don't you tell me the truth about the cause and effect of the matter?" "Don't worry, I will blame the Schultz family for this. You must believe that I have always been extremely tolerant towards the Northern Lords. Think about the Uman family and the Dawson family. What big mistakes did they make before, but aren't they still doing well now?" Lucien remained unmoved. Colin shrugged and said helplessly, "You don't dare to kill me, but you don't want to let me go. Your Excellency Lucien, you are not going to just look at me like this for the rest of your life, are you?" "Why not?" Lucien finally replied. Colin smiled faintly and joked, "Okay, then you can stay with me in this dark basement for the rest of your life. It just so happens that there are so many fine wines here, I guess the rest of your life will not be too boring." Lucien's face darkened. Seemed to have finally made up his mind and said harshly, "I'm sorry, Viscount Angelet, I have to wrong you." With his words, Colin immediately felt the atmosphere in the wine cellar change. If it was a storm before, now it is turned upside down. "Wait. Lucy." Boom. Before Colin could finish speaking, he saw a fist shadow rapidly growing in size in front of him, and an irresistible, huge force, accompanied by a violent whistling sound, struck hard at his chest. The surrounding air also became stagnant, and Colin felt as if he was in a huge net, and every movement required great effort. There was no way to avoid it, so he only had time to protect his chest with both hands. Boom. Exploding holy light and a surging fighting spirit suddenly exploded between the two of them, and ripples spread out in circles, shaking the entire wine cellar. All the wine burst instantly, and the overflowing aroma of wine filled the small space. Click. Amid the heart-stopping sound of bones breaking, Colin felt a sharp pain coming from his hands. He couldn't help but scream, and his whole body was violently hit by the force of the shock and hit the side wall. Lucien was unyielding and immediately caught up with him. His fists gathered terrifying power and struck Colin's legs again. There was another heartbreaking sound of bone cracking, and Colin collapsed completely to the ground, sweating profusely and gasping for breath. However, he did not look too panicked. Instead, he twitched the corners of his mouth, revealed a sarcastic smile, and said with difficulty. Haha, if you are really brave, just kill me immediately, otherwise, it will make you worse than death. Lucien looked at Colin, whose limbs were broken, and seemed to finally relax. He said calmly, Master Viscount, please be patient and stay here for a while, waiting for Schultz. The family has found out the real culprit behind the murder of Bishop John and will apologize to you again. After saying this, he ignored Colin, turned around, and strode away. After leaving the wine cellar, Lucien glanced at the 2 guards guarding the door and ordered, "Guard this place, and don't let anyone get close except the Earl and me." "Yes." The 2 guards said. He responded quickly. They had also heard the movement in the wine cellar just now. They were not stupid and had already guessed something, but they did not dare to ask more questions at this time. When Lucien's figure disappeared at the end of the stone steps, Calm returned to the basement again. But not long after, there was a crackling sound in the wine cellar, which seemed to indicate that the wine bottle was broken, followed by a piercing scream. Immediately, silence returned. The 2 guards guarding the door looked at each other and saw the confusion in each other's eyes. "What's going on?" one person couldn't help but ask in a low voice. "I don't know." The other person shook his head, with a trace of worry on his face. "That person, nothing will happen to him, right?" Of course they know who the person inside is, and they also know that the other person has a noble status. If something happens to him, how about I go in and take a look? "Well, go ahead, and I'll hold the door for you." One of the guards immediately pushed the door open and walked in. He saw that the wine cellar was in a mess, with collapsed wine racks and broken wine bottles everywhere, and the air was filled with a strong aroma of wine. And in the innermost position of the wine cellar, against the wall, Viscount Angelet was lying motionless on the ground. "Lord Viscount," the guard called several times but found that the other party did not respond. He walked forward carefully, got closer, and shouted a few more times, but there was still no response from Colin. The guard was a little flustered, so he leaned down, reached out, and patted Colin on the shoulder. "Viscount." "Whoa." In an instant, Colin, who had been motionless, suddenly raised his head, opened his bloody mouth, and his ferocious fangs shone with a cold light in the dim candle light. "Ah!" The guard let out a short exclamation and then found that all his strength and blood were rapidly draining along the arm that was bitten by the other party. He opened his mouth wide, trying to cry out for help, but found that he could only make a low moan of "ho, ho." With the inhalation of blood, Colin's body expanded rapidly, and the broken bones were healing at an unreasonable speed. A pair of huge bat wings protruded from his back, filling up the entire wine cellar in an instant. Spacious space. Seeing that his companion had not responded, the guard outside the door carefully opened the wine cellar door. Then, he saw a scene he would never forget. In the restaurant on the 3rd floor of the Swan Castle, the young maid took light steps and brought plates of delicious food to the long table. Count Schultz had an elegant smile on his face and said politely, "Your Majesty the Archbishop, you have worked hard all the way to Swan City. Please taste the delicacies prepared by the Schultz family for you." Ajani, smiling and thanking him, scanned the hall with his beautiful eyes and asked curiously, "Your Majesty, Earl, on the way here, I met Duke St. Hilda and his entourage returning from Yulong City. I heard her say, Ange Viscount Lai stayed in Swan City to help investigate the disappearance of Bishop John, so why didn't you see him?" Earl Schultz's expression remained unchanged, and he said with a smile, "Your Excellency, Archbishop, what a pity, the Viscount just left this afternoon and happened to be with us. You missed it." "Really? That's a pity." Ajani nodded, seeming to believe it. "What about your husband? Isn't he also at Swansea Castle?" Ajani asked again. Count Schultz was just thinking about how to explain when he saw a figure walking into the restaurant out of the corner of his eye. He immediately smiled and said, "Lucien, why did you take so long? The Archbishop just asked about you." Lucien walked into the restaurant, bowed to Ajani, and explained with a smile, "I'm sorry, Your Excellency the Archbishop, a thief just slipped into the basement and wanted to steal wine. I went to deal with it, so I was late." Ajani stood up and returned the greeting, smiling and saying, "A thief dares to come to Swansea Castle to steal something? How audacious! Who says it isn't? Maybe it's because the wine stored in the castle cellar is so famous that it attracts covetous people." His eyes, Count Schultz said with a smile. As they talked and laughed, the atmosphere of the banquet gradually became lively. But not long after, the housekeeper hurried over and whispered a few words in Lucien's ear. Then, Lucien's expression changed visibly. "What's wrong?" Ajani asked curiously. Lucien smiled, pretending to be calm, and said, "It's nothing, I just didn't expect that the thief who stole the wine just now had an accomplice and actually rescued him." After that, he wiped his mouth with a napkin, stood up and said, "I'm so sorry, Your Excellency the Archbishop, I have to catch this escaped thief. I'm afraid I won't be able to enjoy this dinner with you." Ajani said doubtfully, "Lucy, well, Your Excellency, he is just a little thief, do you still need to hunt him down personally? That thief has some abilities, and the family guards have disappointed me so much, so, I still have to chase him myself and make you laugh." Ajani smiled and waved her hand, indicating that the other party should help themselves. Lucien immediately gave Count Schultz a wink and strode out. Earl Schultz was uneasy, but on the surface, he remained calm and tried to speak in a relaxed tone. "Your Excellency, Archbishop, you don't have to worry about Lucien, let's just enjoy this dinner." Ajani was deeply moved. He glanced at the Countess beside him and said with a smile, "Okay. The Original Vampire." Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 338. When Lucien returned to the basement, he saw corpses everywhere. The bodies of the Schultz family guards. However, the bodies of Colin and Bishop John had disappeared. Lucien suppressed the anger rising in his heart and asked the butler beside him, what happened at that time. The butler carefully explained, "Sir, I was not present at the time, but according to the guard who came to report, shortly after you left, there was a scream in the basement. Then, the guards guarding the hall entered the basement to check on the situation, and at the same time sent a person to report the news. I rushed here immediately after receiving the report, only to find that I had entered. More than 30 guards in the basement were all brutally killed, and Viscount Angelet was missing. However, I guess they have not escaped from Swansea Castle yet." Lucien's eyes lit up and he asked quickly, "Oh? Why?" "Because the guards didn't find anyone entering or leaving the castle, so unless they can fly, they must still be in Swan Castle." "Okay, mobilize people and search the whole castle." "Yes, sir." When the first ray of morning light shone on Swansea Castle, Lucien was still standing at the entrance of the basement, maintaining the same posture as last night. Familiar footsteps sounded behind him. Lucien looked back and saw Count Schultz walking towards him with a cup of coffee. "Would you like to take a rest?" Count Schultz handed the coffee to his husband and asked. "No need." Lucien shook his head, took the coffee and drank it in one gulp. Although he had not slept all night, he did not seem to be affected much and was still in high spirits. But the worry in his eyes has not diminished. When Count Schultz saw this, the gloom in his heart suddenly became heavier, and he asked, "Still haven't you found anything?" Lucien shook his head, and just as he was about to say something, he saw the captain of the Swan Castle Guard, Knight Bright, hurried away. "Come over." He was refreshed and asked quickly, "How is it, did you find anything?" Knight Bright saluted first, and then reported, "Your Excellency, Lord Earl, Lucien, the guards have completed the search of Swan Castle but Viscount Angelet has not been found yet. However, we found blood stains on the wall on the east side of the castle." Count Schultz asked eagerly, "So, where did they escape from Neuschwanstein Castle? It should be like this." Lucien frowned and asked in a bad tone, then tell me, how did they climb over the wall without alerting the patrol guards, and they were still carrying a broken limb in the condition of a disabled person? Nightbright suddenly suffocated, lowered his head and said, "Subordinate, I don't know." Lucien snorted lightly and ordered, "Notify the city defense immediately, close all the gates of Swan City, and prohibit any people are coming in and out. You personally bring a team of guards and follow me to search the city." "Yes," Nightbright responded immediately, and then turned around to prepare. Earl Schultz frowned and asked, "Who rescued Viscount Angelet? Could it be the Duke of St. Hilda?" Lucien's face was gloomy and he said coldly, "Whether it is whoever it is, I will catch them back." After saying that, the 6th level warrior strode out facing the rising sun. The hazy moonlight is like a veil of mist, passing through the window and filling the room. Count Schultz had just finished taking a bath, and her hair was still smelling of fresh air. She was wearing a pair of pure white silk pajamas and sat down in front of the dressing table. Looking at herself in the bronze mirror, the Countess suddenly sighed, and an unconcealable look of worry appeared on her beautiful face. It has been 3 days since Colin escaped from the basement. In 3 days, Lucien personally led the team and turned Swan City upside down, but still could not find Colin's whereabouts. This morning, Lucien determined that Colin had escaped from Swan City, so he led another 3,000 troops and chased him out. In the evening, the messenger brought back good news. Lucien had discovered Colin's traces, and it would not take long to capture them. Logically speaking, such good news should make Count Schultz feel at ease. However, after receiving the news, the Countess always had an ominous premonition. After pondering in front of the mirror for a long time, Count Schultz called out to the door, "Mary." After waiting for a moment, there was no response from the maid who was supposed to be guarding the door. Count Schultz frowned slightly and was about to stand up to check, but at this moment, a gust of wind suddenly rushed in through the open window. Phew! The candles were blown out, and darkness instantly enveloped the entire room. Count Schultz's heart suddenly broke out, and when he was about to shout, he found that the back of his neck was tightly grasped by a big hand. "Don't make a sound, Lord Count." Listening to the familiar voice behind her, Count Schultz's heart almost jumped out of her throat. She tried to stay calm and said with a forced smile, "Viscount Angelet, where have you been before? We have been worried about you for a long time." Colin turned to Count Schultz and looked at the beautiful Countess in front of him in the soft moonlight. The two people's posture at this time was quite ambiguous, like lovers embracing each other under the moon. Of course, if Colin's big hand hadn't firmly grasped the back of Earl Schultz's neck. "Your Majesty Earl, I really can't bear the reception your husband Lucien received before, so I can only choose to avoid it temporarily." "Avoid the itch." "Viscount Angelet, I apologize for Lucien's previous offense. But please believe that the Schultz family has no ill will towards you or the St. Hilda family. If you feel that there is something wrong in your heart, angry, I can make it up to you." Count Schultz's tone became ambiguous, and his body slowly moved closer to Colin. Facing the temptation of this mature and beautiful countess, Colin remained unmoved at all, and even suddenly increased the strength of his hands, as if he wanted to crush Count Schultz's delicate and slender neck. "Ah!" Count Schultz groaned in pain, and immediately did not dare to do it again. Just the big watery eyes looked at Colin aggrievedly, and the tenderness and charm revealed in them seemed to melt steel. "It's a pity that Colin couldn't be moved," he said coldly. "Count Schultz, please explain the cause and effect of this matter honestly." "Viscount Angelet, I admit that what Lucien did before was indeed too much." "That's too much, but he is just worried that you will misunderstand the Schultz family." "Misunderstanding," Colin sneered and interrupted Count Schultz's sophistry. "Don't tell me that Bishop John's death has nothing to do with you, let alone tell me that you didn't try to coax Vera into the city. Also, Do you really think that I don't know who Vera's real biological mother is? Count Schultz suddenly understood why he had exposed the secret in the first place. At this moment, she wanted to tear that damn Duke St. Hilda into pieces. Not only did this impostor give her a bad idea, but he also changed hands and pushed the Schultz family into a pit of fire when he saw the situation was not good. Perhaps, from the beginning, this Duke of St. Hilda wanted the Schultz family to be at odds with the St. Hilda family. Count Schultz found himself in a dilemma. Lying was no longer possible, after all Colin had seen through his trick from the beginning. But she didn't dare to tell the truth. Because the Schultz family cannot afford to tell the truth. Pretending to be the mother of the Duke of the North, she assisted in the murder of Bishop John. Count Schultz did not believe that Colin or the St. Hilda family would let him go. Looking at Count Schultz, who was struggling, Colin spoke again. Count Schultz, I said that I am a kind man. As long as you are willing to tell the truth, I will forgive all your previous sins. So, I'll give you another chance. If you dare to tell another lie, don't blame me for being cruel. Count Schultz's expression changed drastically, and he sighed after a while. Viscount Angelet, please believe me, Bishop John's death has nothing to do with the Schultz family. You must not fall for this clumsy frame-up method. Moreover, I am really Vera's biological mother, and I even dared to confront Marquis Garcia. Hey! Colin sighed, as if he had completely lost trust in the Countess, and said coldly, for the sins you have committed, please ask my lord for forgiveness. As he said that, he handed over a handful of the dagger plunged into Count Schultz's heart. Ugh! Count Schultz's cry of pain was held in Colin's throat before she could even leave her mouth. Her eyes were full of disbelief. She obviously didn't expect that Colin would really dare to kill her. After all, she is also the wife of a dignified Earl of the North and a 6th-level warrior. Isn't Colin afraid of revenge? After a burst of intense pain, there was a surge of powerlessness. Count Schultz felt that the light in front of her eyes was disappearing little by little. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to leave something to the world, but she couldn't find it. No sound. Before completely losing consciousness, Count Schultz felt as if someone had bitten him on the neck. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 339. Count Schultz felt that he had had a long dream. In her dream, she actually saw the Lord of Glory. The Lord touched her forehead lightly, as if he were saying something else. But it was this oracle that Count Schultz found that he could not hear clearly. It seemed that something was cutting off her connection with the Lord, making it impossible for them to communicate. Opening her eyes, Count Schultz found that she was still in the bedroom of Swansea Castle. Through the dim moonlight streaming in from the window, she could clearly see Colin sitting on a chair in front of her, looking at her leisurely. Count Schultz felt that she should have felt fear, but in fact, Colin seemed to be shrouded in a sacred halo in her eyes at this time. Suddenly, the image of the Lord of Glory that he had just seen in his dream overlapped with the face of the young Viscount in front of him. This discovery shocked Count Schultz, but a kind of reverence and admiration rooted deep in his blood flowed into his heart uncontrollably, making Count Schultz just want to worship Colin. What happened to me? Count Schultz asked in a sleepy tone with hazy eyes. Colin sat on the chair, looking down at Count Schultz, who was collapsed on the ground, and said indifferently, "You just died, but I forgive your sins, so I give you rebirth." Rebirth? Count Schultz looked in disbelief, but when she lowered her head, she saw the dagger still inserted in her heart. "Pull it out yourself," Colin's indifferent voice sounded again. Count Schultz grasped the handle of the dagger with trembling hands. Her heart was filled with fear, but she followed Colin's orders without hesitation. Chi! The dagger was drawn. Count Schultz screamed in pain, but did not see the blood splattering as expected. Moreover, She even felt as if this supposedly fatal wound did not exist at all. "From now on, you will be bathed in the grace of our Lord and will not die easily again," Colin said again. With that look, perhaps even Pope Gregory himself could not do better. The fear on Count Schultz's face was gradually replaced by piety, and she was seen lying on the ground, saying, "Praise my Lord." Raising his head again, Count Schultz looked at Colin with infinite reverence. Asked, "Are you the one favored by God?" Colin nodded and said, "Yes, but you only need to know my identity yourself, and you are not allowed to tell others." "I understand." Count Schultz nodded immediately. After experiencing the miracle that happened to him, Count Schultz now trusted Colin unreservedly. Colin carefully observed every subtle change in Count Schultz, wanting to see if the transformed vampire could really turn an enemy into a friend. After all, blood descendants are self-aware, so Colin had been careful to avoid transforming his enemies before because he was worried that the vampires would respect him on the surface but rebel behind his back. Now it seems that Count Schultz seems to have been brainwashed and is no longer hostile to Colin. However, it is not yet possible to draw a conclusion. Colin still needs further verification. "Tell me, what happened to Bishop John before? Who asked you to pretend to be Vera's biological mother?" Faced with the same problem again, Count Schultz decisively did not quibble anymore but said honestly, "This matter started 10 days ago, when a man who looked exactly like the previous Duke St. Hilda suddenly came to me." Duke St. Hilda, Colin's heart suddenly trembled, and he couldn't help but scream. Yes. Although he looks exactly like the old Duke, there is still a big difference in his tone and demeanor. Of course I can see it. But because this man also has the strength of a paladin, I dare not resist. I can only follow his instructions. This person should be injured, so we need to cooperate in capturing Bishop John and helping him heal. Moreover, he also knows many secrets of the St. Hilda family, including Vera's life experience, so they asked me to pretend to be Vera's biological mother, saying that there was no need to worry about anyone exposing me, because Vera's real biological mother didn't dare to recognize this daughter at all. Listening to Count Schultz's story, Colin frowned and asked, "Then what happened later? Why did Bishop John's body appear in the basement of Swansea Castle?" "When we saw Bishop John's body, Lucien and I were also frightened. Because I clearly let Lucien go," remind that person. "He also knows that you want to search the whole fort. I thought he would hide somewhere else temporarily, but who knew? Who knew he actually betrayed you?" Colin understood immediately. Earl Schultz nodded and said, "Yes, I think it was because he saw that the Duke was not deceived and entered Swan City, and felt that the Schultz family had lost its use value, so he simply provoked a conflict between us and the St. Hilda family." Colin pondered thoughtfully for a moment and then asked, "Are you related to the Morrison family?" The Morrison family. Count Schultz seemed a little surprised that Colin would suddenly mention this family. After being stunned for a moment, he shook his head and said, "Our relationship with the Morrison family has never been close, and we haven't had much contact recently." Regarding Count Schultz's confession, Colin took a cautious attitude. He couldn't check the vampire's consciousness, so he didn't know whether the other party was hiding something or deceiving him. However, judging from what Count Schultz said before, Colin was inclined to believe that she was telling the truth. After all, if she wanted to lie, she would definitely not spin a story about Duke St. Hilda's resurrection from the dead, which would be too hard to believe. If she is telling the truth, what is going on with this Duke of St. Hilda? Did the Morrison family really resurrect Duke St. Hilda? Colin couldn't help but think of the strange blood pool under the bell tower of Phoenix Butterfly Castle. But then, he thought that Count Schultz said that the demeanor, tone, habits, etc. of Duke St. Hilda were different from the real Duke. Therefore, maybe he was not resurrected from the dead, but resurrected from the dead. At this time, Colin suddenly thought of Prince Leahy's reminder. Jin was not dead. Thinking of this, The isolated doubts seem to be finally connected by a thread. Although this conjecture is too unbelievable, it seems to be the most reasonable explanation. Mr. Jin borrowed the body of Duke St. Hilda and resurrected him. Colin suddenly felt a bone-chilling chill. The terrifying figure who had caused so much misery to all the people in the north was still hiding in a corner, and he might stand up at any time and start another bloody storm. Perhaps, the Schultz family is the result of the opponent's small test. Colin narrowed his eyes and forced himself to calm down. He knew that Mr. Jin was not invulnerable, at least he only dared to hide in the shadows now, even if he had occupied the body of a paladin. That's right. Although he successfully resurrected through the corpse, Duke St. Hilda suffered severe injuries before his death. No wonder he wanted to kidnap Bishop John, probably because he wanted Bishop John to help him treat his injuries. Colin immediately woke up. He had to inform the church about this. If Mr. Jin wanted to recover from his injuries, he would definitely kidnap the church's senior pastor again. In addition, he also thought of Prince Leahy. Isn't this person tracking Mr. Jin all over the world? If this news is revealed to him, this paladin of the San Lorenzo family will definitely be willing to help eliminate evil in the north. Thinking of this, Colin finally breathed a sigh of relief. His eyes returned to Count Schultz. The Countess, who was about to fall asleep, was now wearing a simple waist dress without any jewelry on her body. However, the dress was well tailored and vividly outlined her exquisite curves in a semicircular shape. The neckline reveals the delicate collarbone and a piece of snow-white delicacy. Coupled with her lowered eyebrows and flattering posture at this time, it further highlighted her mature, charming style. Colin forcibly withdrew his gaze and suppressed the restlessness in his heart. For this blood descendant who was transformed from an enemy, Colin still needs to put her to a final test. He really wanted to know whether the blood descendant would betray him. Count Schultz, next, I need you to do this. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 340. The sun was setting and it was getting late. The Schultz family guard set up a temporary camp on a hill. They have been away from Swan City for 4 days. During these 4 days, hundreds of miles around Swan City have been thoroughly searched, but nothing has been found. Lucien's patience seemed to be running out, and his temper became increasingly irritable. When the guards saw this, they all avoided this gentleman and even walked much more slowly, for fear of getting into trouble and becoming the target of their anger. Piles of bonfires rose in the camp, and the orange flames licked the mutton on the iron rack, but all they could taste was the dripping hot oil. Lucien sat expressionlessly in front of the campfire, took out a roasted golden leg of lamb, and began to bite it regardless of the heat of his mouth. The attendant quickly and carefully handed the wine bottle over, and then backed away. After walking a few steps, there was a faint sound of horse hooves coming from the gate of the camp, and then a messenger hurried over. Lucien frowned at the man's attire and asked, "Are you from Swan City?" The messenger quickly stepped forward to salute and said, "Yes, sir, the Earl asked me to send you a letter. He handed the letter to Lucien. Lucien opened it and found that it was indeed a letter written by Count Schultz. After scanning it hastily, he stood up in surprise, with undisguised ecstasy on his face. Seeing this, the retinue asked knowingly, "My lord, is there any good news?" The man was found, and he was hiding in the Swan Castle. Haha, as expected, my initial guess was right, and I was almost deceived, Lucien said excitedly. Congratulations, sir. Give me the order to rest for 1 night and return to Swan City tomorrow. Yes. Swan Castle. Archbishop Ajani entered a living room under the leadership of the maid. However, here, she did not see Count Schultz who invited her, but met another person. Viscount Angelette. Ajani looked at Colin in the wheelchair with a surprised look on her face. Haven't you already left Swan City? Colin smiled bitterly and said, "Hey, Someone doesn't want me just leave like this. Ajani pointed to the wheelchair under Colin and asked, "Are you injured?" Colin pretended to sigh, nodded, and pointed to the corner of the living room with his chin. Said, "I'm lucky, what happened to Bishop John is really heartbreaking." Ajani then noticed that there was a coffin placed in the living room. She seemed to realize something and walked away with a solemn expression. He went over and saw Bishop John lying inside the open coffin. "Who did this?" Ajani's tone became cold. "Lucien." "Lucien," Ajani shouted in surprise. In addition to anger, there was also a trace of unconcealable fear in her voice. "That's right," Colin nodded and said solemnly, "Lucien colluded with outsiders and killed Bishop John. When I discovered the clues, he wounded me and imprisoned me in the basement. Fortunately, Count Schultz was on time. He found out and rescued me." Ajani's eyes flashed, and she asked dubiously, "So, Count Schultz deserted his husband and rescued you?" Colin said seriously, "As a pious man, a glorious believer, an upright northern knight, and a noble imperial earl, she chose to voluntarily abandon the darkness and embrace the light. Is there any problem?" "Of course not." Ajani suppressed the doubts in her heart and asked, "What about Count Schultz? Can I see her?" "She is next door, waiting for Lucien's return." Ajani's expression changed, and she asked slightly nervously, "What does she want to do?" "Of course, she is asking her husband why he betrayed his faith and honor." Ajani looked at Colin, who looked upright and felt surprised. After a while, she whispered in a low voice, "Lucien is a 6th-level warrior if it angers him." Colin snorted and interrupted lightly, "Your Excellency the Archbishop, are you afraid of facing the power of a 6th-level warrior?" Ajani took a deep breath and regained her composure. Kupo said calmly, "Of course not. Under the glory of our Lord, no evil can escape judgment." "That's good." Colin looked at the Archbishop in front of him with a smile. "Later Count Schultz will expose Lucien's crimes and draw a clear line with him. The reason why I invite you here is that I hope you can be a witness." "Okay." Looking at Colin, who looked calm, Ajani seemed to realize something and put down her worries. After thinking for a while, Ajani asked again, "You just said that Lucien colluded with outsiders to murder Bishop John. I wonder who this outsider is and why did he murder Bishop John?" "It was the previous Saint Hilda." "Duke." "Who?" Ajani thought Colin was joking. However, Colin said seriously, "That's right, the Duke of Saint Hilda, who was supposed to die, has been resurrected. However, I suspect that it is not the Duke himself who is resurrected, but Mr. Jin, who used some unknown method to resurrect. The forbidden curse of his name took possession of the Duke's body and brought him back to life." Ajani's eyes widened, and she stared at Colin blankly, obviously feeling that everything he just said was too unbelievable. Seeing this, Colin added calmly, "This is my guess, believe it or not. However, you must also know that Prince Lehigh is currently in the north, and the reason why he appears here is precisely because of Sir." Ajani fell into deep thought. She knew about the theft of Duke St. Hilda's body. After all, she personally presided over the other party's funeral. Moreover, she also heard about Prince Leahy's affairs. Therefore, although Colin's speculation at this time was somewhat shocking, Ajani felt that it was very likely to be the truth of the matter. Thinking of this, her face became extremely solemn, and she said solemnly, "If Mr. Jin really possesses the body of a paladin, then the horror of this matter is beyond your expectation. I must report it to the Pope immediately. Get off." "That's right. In order to treat Duke St. Hilda's physical injuries, Mr. Jin will definitely continue to kidnap the church's senior priests. You need to be prepared to deal with it. Not only that, if Mr. Jin is really allowed to do so, with the complete body of a paladin, no one will be able to control him." Colin's expression changed, and he asked, "Why?" Ajani hesitated and said vaguely, "The mage's forbidden spell, the power is too terrifying. What can limit them now is that their bodies cannot withstand the backlash of the forbidden curse. However, if Mr. Jin has an intact paladin body, then he may no longer suffer from the backlash of the forbidden curse. Worry." Colin's heart suddenly jumped, and he exclaimed, "Can the body of the paladin resist the backlash of the forbidden curse? At least it will not be as fragile as a mortal body. Even if there is some damage, it can be made up for if it happens again." Coupled with the sacrifice method Mr. Jin used before in Fallen Eagle City to share some of the backlash damage, I'm afraid he will no longer be restricted. A holy mage who can release forbidden spells without any scruples. It's scary to think about it. The atmosphere suddenly became extremely solemn. Just as the two of them were frowning and thinking, there was a sound of footsteps in the next room. Colin and Ajani immediately looked at each other and silently exchanged thoughts. Lucien is back. The original vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 341. Where are the others? Where did you find him? Who are the accomplices who rescued him? Lucien asked Count Schultz as soon as he entered the door. Count Schultz did not answer his husband's question, but handed over a roll of parchment. Lucien took it with confusion. As soon as he glanced at it, his expression changed drastically and he asked, "What do you mean?" Count Schultz turned around, picked up the coffee on the table and took a sip. Said with an indifferent expression, "That's what it says in writing, I want to divorce you." Lucien held the divorce document in his hand tightly, his eyes flashed with violence, and his tone became bone-chilling. "Why?" Earl Schultz avoided Lucien's cannibalistic gaze and said calmly, "Because I can't tolerate you continuing to make such mistakes. The glory of the Schultz family cannot be tarnished because of you." Lucien said coldly. He smiled coldly and said mockingly, "Is this my fault alone? It was obviously a decision made jointly by both of us. Now you want to just walk away like this, isn't it too fanciful?" Count Schultz shook his head slowly. Said, "No, Lucien, it was clearly you who forced me to make the decision. Was it you who was bewitched by others and allowed Bishop John to be kidnapped and murdered, or was it you who broke Viscount Angelet's limbs with your own hands and wanted to be imprisoned in the basement? You should bear all these charges." Lucien suddenly laughed loudly, as if he had heard a big joke. He stopped after a while, and then he walked step by step toward Earl Schultz, slowly approached, and said, "You want to put all these charges on me? Haha, do you really think I will let you frame me?" After saying this, Lucien had already arrived at Scheuer. Count Schultz stood in front of her, reached out to hold her smooth chin, stared into her eyes, and asked, "What happened in the past few days when I left? Tell me." Count Schultz looked at the explosion without fear. Lucien, who was on edge, still spoke indifferently, "Lucien, as long as we are married, I will leave you a way to survive. Sign this divorce document and run away for your life." "Escape," Lucien said again. He sneered, "If I just walk away, wouldn't it mean that the charges you framed me have been confirmed? Then, I will really be the real culprit who murdered Bishop John and imprisoned Viscount Angelet." Seeing the other party, Count Schultz's eyes flashed with panic, but then he calmed down and said confidently, "Then what else can you do? Kill me? That will only plunge you into an abyss of eternal destruction." Lucien slowly exerted force on his hand and pinched Count Schultz's delicate chin until it cracked. The murderous intent in his eyes was undisguised as he threatened, "You want to destroy me? Do you think I will be captured without mercy?" Earl Schultz had a look of pain on his face, but his eyes remained firm, and he sneered, "Lucien, even if you are a 6th-level warrior, you are still just a commoner. Even if you defend yourself, who will believe you? And as the Earl of the Empire, and I have Viscount Angelet and the Archbishop of the North as witnesses, who do you think will be convicted of those crimes? So, your only way out now is to get out of Swan City and never see you again. Go back to the north." Lucien looked at the woman in front of him who had been with him for more than 20 years, and it was really hard to accept that she had betrayed him so easily. His eyes became more and more dangerous, his breathing became heavier and heavier, and the strength in his hands became stronger and stronger, as if he were going to completely crush Count Schultz's skull in the next second. But faced with such a real death threat, Count Schultz did not flinch and stared straight at his husband, as if looking at a dead man. The two faced off for a long time, and finally, Lucien backed down. "Just listen to him, tell me, what happened?" Count Schultz's eyes were blurred and he said piously, "I saw the Lord of Glory and was inspired by him, only then did I make up my mind to do something with the sins of the past, a complete cut." "Bullshit," Lucien said angrily, obviously unable to believe this nonsense. "You have to think clearly, I am your biggest support. Drive me away, and you will have no choice but to let Colin go. No matter what he promised you before, how can you guarantee that he will not break his promise? Think about the Uman family and the Dawson family. Yes, although these two families seem not to be punished, their titles and territories are still intact. Yes, but what about the previous Count Uman and Marquis Dawson? Don't you know what happened to them? Don't be fooled by that boy Colin, he is not a kind and benevolent savior, but a ruthless careerist." However, these words did not make Count Schultz wake up. She still looked at her husband with cold eyes and said lightly, "Sign the divorce document and I will let you go. Solon, you can come with me, take him away." Hearing his son's name, Lucien once again felt an uncontrollable anger in his heart, and said viciously, "Where's Colin? Doesn't he dare to come out to see me?" "Who says I don't dare to see him?" "You." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw Colin sitting in a wheelchair and being pushed into the room by Archbishop Ajani. When enemies met, Lucien's eyes instantly turned blood red. Facing this tiger, who seemed to be willing to devour anyone, Colin did not seem to feel threatened at all. He even added fuel to the fire and said, "Your Excellency Lucien, I advise you to just let it go and stop doing unnecessary things." Resistance. Lucien let go of Count Schultz, faced Colin, showed a bloodthirsty smile, and said, "Do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Then what are you waiting for?" Colin still looked confident. "I warned you when we were in the basement, you'd better kill me, otherwise, I will definitely make your life worse than death." Archbishop Ajani frowned after listening to Colin's words. As if he were afraid that Lucien would really lose his mind, he hurriedly advised, "Your Excellency Lucien, violence cannot solve any problem. If you kill Viscount Angelet, you will only make yourself a public enemy of the North and a public enemy of the nobles. Even if you successfully escape by force, you can only hide in a dark corner and linger in the future. Your best choice now is to give up resistance and admit your sins. Our Lord is merciful, and he is willing to give everyone who sincerely confesses his sins a chance to atone." A sarcastic sneer appeared on Lucien's lips, and he was about to speak again, but his expression suddenly changed. Because, he heard the rapid footsteps outside the door. Obviously, a large number of Schultz family guards are already gathering here. Seeing this, Colin once again spoke provocatively, "Lucien, give up your resistance, you are just a 6th level warrior. Do you really think you own Swan City if you marry an earl? Look, now you are enemies of the city. Don't you think you are superior in force? If you have the ability to kill everyone here, it's enough for me to kill one of you," Lucien roared, and his whole body turned into a bolt of lightning, and in the blink of an eye he was rushing to Colin. He grabbed Colin's collar with one hand and lifted him out of the wheelchair. He was about to taunt, but suddenly felt a hint of danger. A ray of silver light flashed from Colin's hand, piercing Lucien's heart like a poisonous snake. Unfortunately, Lucien realized something was wrong at the last moment and twisted his body forcefully to avoid his vitals. Chi! The dagger was completely buried. Just didn't hit the heart. Lucien looked at Colin with a look of horror. He never expected that Colin, whose limbs and bones were crushed by him just 3 days ago, would actually recover in such a short period of time. Even the Archbishop of the North's healing technique cannot have such an effect. "You've been fooled." Colin showed a proud smile. Lucien's eyes flashed with a stern look, he roared wildly, and punched out with his right hand. Bang! Colin flew backward like a rag doll, blood spurting out of his mouth uncontrollably. At this moment, the guards also rushed in, pointing their swords at the former male owner of the castle. When Lucien saw this, he didn't have time to check whether Colin was dead. He immediately ran towards the window and jumped out. Quick! Don't let him escape, Count Schultz ordered loudly. He can't run. Colin stood up unsteadily. His chest was obviously dented, but such a horrific injury seemed to have no impact on him at all. After wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, Colin also jumped from the window. The guards followed suit and poured out of the room again. Ajani did not catch up, but looked at Count Schultz with an inquiring gaze. After a while, she smiled and said, "Your Excellency, your performance today really amazed me." Count Schultz smiled lightly and said, "What, Archbishop, don't you think I don't have the courage to face Lucien?" "No, I just think that not all women are like you and can decisively sever ties with their husbands for the sake of justice. Under the guidance of my lord, I am fearless." Ajani looked at Count Schultz with a pious face and couldn't help but secretly wonder, what promise did Colin give Count Schultz that made her betray Lucien? Even in the face of death threats, the Countess dared to sever ties with Lucien? What secret is hidden here? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Original Vampire. Author, Lugo Busroot. Chapter 342. The weather in the north is changeable this season. The sun is still scorching during the day, but at night, it is already drizzling. Moreover, there are flashes of thunder in the sky, and faint thunder rolling among the clouds. It seems that the real storm is still behind. A bolt of lightning pierced the sky, illuminating the wilderness and Lucien, who was running hastily in it. This peak warrior was in quite a mess at this time, with disheveled hair, disheveled clothes, and a dagger stuck in his chest. His whole body was stained with blood, but he didn't know how much of it was his own or how much was that of others. Although he had escaped from Swan City, Lucien knew that he was not out of danger. He was vaguely aware that there was a line of sight staring directly at him. But when he looked around, he couldn't find the source of this line of sight. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, and Lucien felt that his physical strength was constantly draining along with the wound on his chest. At this time, he was like a wounded beast, running away in panic under the gaze of the hunter. The hunter is very patient and hides in the dark, waiting for the beast to gradually weaken before launching a fatal blow. We can't sit still and wait for death. Lucien was heartbroken, immediately got off his horse, and stabbed the horse hard on the butt. The war horse was in pain and spread its hooves to run faster. Lucien, on the other hand, was quietly hiding in the bushes beside the road, holding his breath and waiting for the pursuers behind him. He is ready to fight back. Time passed little by little, but the expected pursuers did not appear. Silver snakes danced in the sky, and a downpour followed. Even with Lucien's temperament as a peak warrior, he couldn't help but feel impatient at this time and began to doubt his own judgment. Could it be that there are no pursuers? Colin and Count Schultz just let him go? If this is really the case, Lucien's eyes flashed with overwhelming anger. He would never give up until this revenge was avenged. Just when Lucien was about to give up the ambush and turn around to leave, a bright light seemed to appear in the darkness. Who is there? Lucien paused and asked in a deep voice. Darkness enveloped the earth, and there was silence except for the wind and rain. But not long after, the mud on the ground suddenly shook slightly, and even the stones in the mud jumped up. A thunderous sound sounded in the distance. It started very far away, but in an instant, it became deafening, as if from the wind and rain. Thousands of troops and horses were killed. This momentum seemed to overwhelm the power of lightning. Lucien narrowed his eyes and looked at a group of cavalry that suddenly appeared not far away like demons. The dense rain was pulled out of a long corridor by the cavalry of about 200 people. With the momentum of tearing through the rain curtain, this group of cavalry rushed towards Lucien. Lucien stood motionless, still looking calm as he faced the cavalry squad that rushed towards him as if the earth was falling apart. He just changed the broadsword in his hand to hold it with both hands, waiting for the coming impact. Clang! However, the cavalry suddenly dispersed 500 steps away from Lucien. Just when Lucien was confused, hundreds of sharp arrows showed a twisted trajectory like poisonous snakes in the rain, broke through the rain curtain, and flew directly toward him. Facing the threat of arrows, Lucien's eyes narrowed, and the broadsword in his hand flashed with brilliance, and the shadow of the sword stretched out in front of him like a barrier. After a burst of ping-ping-pong-pong, this round of arrow rain was all blocked. Before Lucien could take a breath, 3 armored knights crashed into him like tanks. Phew! A sword slashed out, and a fierce sword light suddenly exploded. Broken limbs, broken arms, and blood and internal organs were flying everywhere in the rain. This sword seemed to change the color of the world. Lucien seemed like a world-destroying demon descending into the world, destroying everything. However, his arrogant posture did not last long before he felt pain in his ankle. Lowering his head, Lucien discovered that one of the 3 riders was still alive. It's just that this man's body has been cut into 2 parts, but he can still swing the sword in his hand and stab Lucien in the ankle. Bang! Lucien threw out his kick and kicked the opponent's head off. Buzz! At this moment, another hail of arrows swept towards him. Lucien waved his sword to resist again. After the rain of arrows, 3 more cavalrymen in heavy armor launched a desperate charge towards him. Lucien realized that the enemy wanted to consume his power in this way. However, he didn't have a good way to crack it, because he had discovered that although the number of cavalry besieging him was not large, they were all professionals. Lucien guessed that these people should be dead soldiers of the Angeli family, but he never expected that such a family that had just emerged for only 2 years would have so many professionals. Moreover, he also discovered that these cavalrymen were really fearless of death. Even if some of them suffered heavy injuries or were chopped into 2 pieces, they still wanted to make up for it with a stab wound on Lucien's body. Even Lucien felt a chill in his bones with this desperate aura. After several rounds of arrows and desperate attacks by heavy armored cavalry, Lucien became increasingly powerless and suffered several wounds to his body. The 6th level warrior was not a god. He was first attacked by Colin and suffered severe chest injuries, and then he fought desperately to escape from Swan City. Now he was attacked in turn by this group of cavalry who were not afraid of death, and he had reached the end of his strength. Viscount Angelet, Lucien finally couldn't help shouting loudly, "We have no invincible hatred, why should we force each other to death?" Unfortunately, the response was just another round of arrows. Then, a huge armored man holding a huge shield and spear rushed towards Lucien like a violent bear. The heavy steps made the earth tremble. Lucien's eyes shrank. Although there was only one person charging this time and he was not riding a horse, he felt as if he was facing a powerful enemy, and his expression became more solemn than ever before. Boom! The 2 collided head-on, and for a moment there was a strong wind and a shrill scream. The rain curtain all over the sky suddenly exploded, and circles of water patterns suddenly bloomed like blooming flowers. 5th level Troll Warrior. At the first moment of the fight, Lucien discovers the identity of his opponent. Before he could figure out how Colin drove a high-level Troll Warrior to kill him, there was a sudden movement in the bushes. Lucien felt the danger and roared violently, and the fighting energy in his body surged like flames. The air made a crisp sound like broken glass, and the rain curtain all over the sky turned into countless fine lines, exploding in all directions. And at this moment, a short-armed man hiding in the bushes burst into the sky. The raindrops flying in the sky were like thin needles, instantly piercing his armor into a sieve. However, This armored man didn't seem to be aware of it and still swung the giant hammer in his hand and hit Lucien. Boom! The ground splashed like water under this hammer. Blood spurted out of Lucien's mouth, and the hands holding the sword couldn't help but tremble. 5th level dwarf warrior. Lucien was convinced that this was by no means a power that the Angeli family could possess. Only the Saint Hilda family, the Lord of the North, could have such strength. So Lucien shouted loudly again, "I surrender, honorable Lord of the North, as long as you are willing to give me a way to survive, I am willing to swear allegiance to you." Swish swish. A dense rain of arrows interrupted Lucien's plea for mercy. What made him even more chilling was that this rain of arrows also enveloped the two armored men, one large and one small, as if these enemies didn't care about the lives or deaths of their companions at all. And the two armored men didn't seem to care about their own lives or deaths. They actually ignored the rain of arrows and rushed towards Lucien again. "Are you crazy?" Lucien's face turned green. He has experienced countless battles, large and small, and faced countless cruel and cunning enemies in his life, but he has never seen such a weird fighting method. The enemies in front of them seemed to be killing machines without emotion, pain, or consciousness. They were not afraid of death and would do whatever it took to accomplish one goal. Kill Lucien. The Original Vampire. Author, Logo Busroot. Chapter 343. Boom. A bolt of lightning pierced the sky, tearing a gap in the darkness that shrouded the earth. Under the electric light, Lucien's veins were exposed all over his body. The broadsword was blocked in front of him, and he arched his body to withstand the huge force of the two armored men. The three of them were covered with arrows, like three hedgehogs. Lucien's face was frighteningly pale. However, what made him even more desperate was that the strength of the two armored men opposite him did not weaken at all, as if the arrows inserted into their bodies did not exist at all to them. The surging force kept impacting Lucien like a waterfall, pushing him back and sliding, and two deep ravines were plowed out of the ground beneath his feet. Seeing the cavalry cruising around with their bows and arrows ready for the next round of shooting, Lucien let out a roar like a trapped animal. With him as the center, a purple-black oval air wave suddenly bloomed. Boom! The two armored men flew out instantly. However, Lucien also felt uncomfortable, with streams of blood slowly flowing out of his eyes, mouth, nose, and ears. Ha ha ha, a wild laugh came from Lucien's mouth. This peak warrior seemed to have predicted his fate. But just like any dying beast that will fight back desperately, Lucien also prepared for the worst. The blood-soaked warrior roared in despair and madness, "In that case, let's die together." Whoosh whoosh. A new round of arrow rain came as expected, but this time, Lucien couldn't avoid it at all. Countless oscillating ripples exploded in the air instantly, squeezing each other and spreading in all directions. The rain of arrows hit the substantial waves and was immediately blown into powder. And Lucien was already laughing wildly and rushing towards the two armored men. The broadsword in his hand was wrapped in purple-black flames and he slashed forward. The low roar instantly dispersed the dense rain curtain, as if tearing open cracks in the space in front of him. The two armored men on the opposite side were calm and unafraid. One held a gun and the other held a hammer, and they faced him. Boom! Countless concussive ripples exploded in the wilderness in an instant, as if a huge stone had been smashed into a pool. The ripples in the air had turned into waves. In just a moment, most of the cavalry cruising around were knocked off their horses. Ha ha ha! Lucien laughed wildly, but suddenly let go of the broadsword in his hand. While the two armored men had not recovered from the stiffness of the blow just now, their bodies were like dexterous swimming fish, bullying into their sides. Clang! Clang! Lucien's fingers were like hooks, and he grabbed one of the two armored men's arms with such force that the armor was deformed. Taking advantage of the forward momentum, the look of madness on Lucien's face became thicker and he roared angrily. Click! The two arms were removed by Lucien. The blood spurted out all over Lucien. At this time, he seemed to have completely fallen into madness. His whole body was covered in blood and he roared to the sky, like a devil crawling out of hell. As soon as the move was successful, Lucien immediately turned back and shouted, "You all die!" Huh! At this moment, there was a sudden whistling sound in the air, and a ray of silver light fell from the sky with the force of wind and thunder. However, Lucien seemed to have anticipated the enemy above him. He stopped suddenly, turned around suddenly, laughed wildly at Colin who fell from the sky, and said, "Finally, I've waited for you." Before he finished speaking, one of his arms was like a dragon coming out of the sea, it grabbed Colin's sword. Chi! Blood splattered everywhere, and the fingers of Lucien's right hand were almost cut off. However, without blinking, his other hand reached out again and grabbed Colin's ankle. Colin was shocked. The huge bat wings rolled up turbulent airwaves, trying to take off again. However, Lucien's feet seemed to have taken root on the ground, and no matter how much Colin struggled, they remained firm. "Who are you?" Lucien couldn't help but have a flash of doubt in his eyes, and then he remembered a rumor he had heard, "Are you a winged knight?" Colin did not respond. Lucien saw that the other person's face was shrouded in a cloud of blood mist, and the curiosity in his heart became more intense. He laughed loudly and shouted, "Let me see your true face." Before he finished speaking, his feet suddenly stopped. A wave of air erupted, and the ground was dented by the force. With the force of the counter shock, he jumped up, and his whole body was wrapped around Colin in mid-air. Colin suddenly waved his bat wings and made a sharp turn in the air. Unfortunately, he was unable to get rid of Lucien, which only made him temporarily lose his balance. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity, Colin let go of the sword in his hand, took out the golden dagger that symbolized the authority of the Guardian of the North, and stabbed Lucien in the chest. Chi! The dagger pierced Lucien's chest, but he made no move to block it. However, he still had a crazy smile on his face and shouted, "Let's die together." Bang! Lucien also inserted one of his hands into Colin's chest like lightning, holding the heart that was still beating. Colin screamed in pain, as if he were infected by the other party's madness, and his whole aura became extremely violent. "I said, if you can't kill me," Colin laughed wildly, "I will make your life worse than death." Before he finished speaking, Colin opened his bloody mouth, and his two fangs flashed with piercing teeth. The cold light plunged into Lucien's neck. The huge bat wings quickly closed and embraced the two of them. "Sure enough, it's you," Lucien judged Colin's identity from his words. Before he could figure out how Colin grew a pair of wings, he found that the blood all over his body was surging crazily to Colin's mouth. Not only the blood, but also strength, temperature, and even consciousness were passing by rapidly. "Let's die together." Lucien immediately tightened his grip before darkness enveloped him. Bang! Colin's heart was crushed instantly. Boom! A burst of thunder rolled across the sky, but the wilderness suddenly became quiet. A group of blood slaves formed a large circle, and in the center of the circle were Colin and Lucien in strange postures. The heavy rain was pouring, but it could not wash away the smell of blood that filled the air. After a long time, Colin stood up to Lucien. Immediately, Lucien got up from the ground and half knelt in front of Colin. The hatred and madness on his face completely disappeared, replaced by mechanical obedience and submission. "Master." Colin looked at Lucien kneeling in front of him, and couldn't help but reveal a proud smile. During this hunt for Lucien, Colin's blood shadow guards suffered heavy losses. Looking around, almost none of them was without injuries. A rough calculation showed that in order to ambush Lucien, a total of 28 blood slaves died this time. Even the two 5th-level blood slaves were seriously injured. Even Colin's own heart was crushed. Fortunately, these impacts are not significant. Colin looked at the hole in his chest and touched the edge of the wound as if nothing was wrong. However, although the losses were heavy, the gains were also huge. A 6th level blood slave. In this way, the peak strength of the Blood Shadow Guards has been qualitatively improved. With Lucien, as long as he does not provoke the other powerful saints in this world, Colin no longer has to worry about his own safety. Even for the resurrected Mr. Jin, as long as the opponent has not completely healed the injuries of the occupied paladin's body, Colin will not be unable to fight back with the help of his current Blood Shadow Guard. It's a pity that Colin cannot advance with the blood of high-level warriors, it must be from high-level knights. However, with the 6th level warrior, Colin will be sure to capture a 6th level knight. Once he successfully entered the 6th level, coupled with the vampire's real body state, Colin felt that he could walk sideways under the sanctuary. It's just that 6th level knights are much harder to catch than 6th level warriors, and such high-level knights must be high-ranking nobles. The difficulty of catching them is not at the same level as Lucien's, so long-term considerations are needed. Currently, there are only 2 6th level knights that Colin knows about: Emperor Reinhardt and the Duke of St. Pros in the east. Which one should I catch? Colin rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. But soon, he laughed and shook his head, feeling that he was a little too ambitious. These 2 people are obviously not something he can deal with now. Let's solve the problem at hand first. Thinking of this, Colin flapped his bat wings, soared into the sky, and flew towards Swan City.